Do you think things are about to get really, really ugly between players and Major League Baseball? Given everything that reared its ugly head in Seattle with regard to the manipulation of players' lives and careers through team control, and given the fact that Major League Baseball couldn't get it together to make a simple decision about the universal DH, messing with everyone's offseason, do you think it's all about to go horribly wrong?
I think it's going to get ugly, and I think it's maybe more of an impetus for, say, the negotiations that are going on right now with Lindor.
So you think the standoff that's fixing to happen between players and Major League Baseball could affect Francisco Lindor's contract negotiations? That, my friend, is a hot take. Hey, this is my friend, Ray.
What's up? This is my friend AD.
Ray is a tour manager who's traveled the world with everyone from the Beastie Boys to the Rolling Stones, engineered artists from Devo to Jane's Addiction to Toni Braxton, and looked after the careers of comics like Jim Gaffigan and Dane Cook.
And AD is a national radio personality, heard on stations across the country, who started off as a major label recording artist that gave me my first job as a tour manager.
I still can't believe that ended well.
Well, we still talk all the time now, and when we do, it's about music and cooking and baseball, especially our beloved New York Mets.
This is Bands, Barbecue, and Baseball. So you said it all off season. Once we got Uncle Stevie and an injection of cash, your rallying cry was depth. And very early on in the game, turns out you were right.
Well, I knew that it would be the one thing that Sandy and, the general manager to be filled in later position would really have to pay attention to, because it's been our bugaboo the last couple of years. It's the problem with the team under the Wilpons was not with the lack of foresight in being prepared for the possible, not even possible injuries, the likely injuries, the injuries that were going to happen. I thought last year, obviously before Steve Cohen came in, last season being shortened, etc., was still such a reminder of how on a short leash everything was, because as soon as an injury or two occurred, we were fledgling. We were like, who's starting this next game? How are we piecemealing together a pitching staff and everything? So I'm a huge fan of looking at the 40-man roster and the depth of the 40-man roster as a legitimate, not legitimate, as the actual roster. The 26-man obviously is what you carry from city to city, and obviously who you're putting in game to game. But you've got to keep those chess pieces warm. You got to keep everybody going. So this right now, the time period where spring training is winding down, we're getting much closer to the season. Cuts are being done as far as who's being placed into the minors, players that may even potentially had a good spring training, but the consideration has to be, okay, do they have options in terms of being able to go into the minors, et cetera? The situation with Carlos Carrasco is a very interesting one, just in terms of every Met fan literally said, "Uh-oh, here we go again." Yeah. Of a pitcher. Yeah,
we haven't even started the season yet, and we're 3 pitchers down. Some may say 3 starting pitchers, depending on where you decide to play Lugo in the season. So, we're out Carrasco, we're out Thor, and we're out a versatile arm that could play a part as a starting pitcher or in the pen. So this call for depth that you had way back when, the moment you found out we got Uncle Stevie's deep pockets to go into, you're like, F the luxury tax. Let's get some arms.
Well, if you look at not only the moves they've made in terms of who they picked up free agent wise, who they traded for, etc. Really, it was all done with, I believe, the 40-man roster as the main driving factor. We turned over almost 50% or roughly 50% of the entire 40-man roster to players that that gave us options and depth, that gave us depth in positions that we didn't have particularly good depth in before. So a lot of Mets fans were kind of clamoring of like, why didn't we pick up the biggest player in this, and why didn't we pick up the biggest player of that? I think a lot of the subtle moves were a lot more. They were a lot more decisive and a lot more of a chess game in terms of now who will go to war with. And the pitching, like you said, the pitching is a perfect example of that. Noah's situation, and even in the fact that he's doing very well in his recovery. He's now pitching off a mound. He's really ramping it back up. But they placed him strategically on the injured list, the 60-day injured list, because that puts things in a position of starting the season with that extra one spot on the roster to place a position player or a pitcher, preferably, in terms of who's going to, how many pitchers are you actually carrying? How many starters are you carrying? How many relievers, so that your entire 40-man roster of pitchers, we're carrying 20. We've got a good amount of pitchers that we're carrying, exactly as you said. Seth Lugo, I think the jury is decided, and his place is in the bullpen, and the opening now of a spot
his place is in the bullpen, provided someone like Carrasco doesn't go down, and what just happened? It's like, I mean.
But the fact that we picked up Lucchesi, the fact that we picked up a couple of other players like Sean Reed Foley, with a perfect example. We traded Matz to Toronto and picked up 3 pitchers that all had major league experience, albeit at different levels and different lengths of coffee, cups of coffee. But Sean Reed Foley has been somebody who's starting out in the minors. He's already been kind of brought down, but I mean, between Thomas Zapucki, Stephen Tarpley, Yamamoto, I think those are more viable options of starters than messing with the bullpen. And I think the other boogaboo that we're going to have to talk about is literally a player or so that has shown in spring training that, they're just not going to have it, and the team is going to have to make a crucial decision about what to do about it. And I'm referring specifically to Betances and Familia. The way that both of them pitched in last season was kind of iffy, and not too certain themselves. Not like Betances coming back from Tommy John and really was not building up the arm strength that he had originally. And Familia, who pitched better in the shortened season, but not fantastic. Both of them in this spring training have been not supplanted, but have been shown up by other pitchers that, if we were going to decide on a 40-man roster who to carry, I think a player like Betances is probably going to be DFA'd. I think he might be designated for assignment, and some other team looking for or in need of pitching really bad might say, I'll give you a prospect or two for him.
I mean, look, Stroman, did you hear what Stroman said? Stroman was kind of it was kind of an end of days situation with him. He said it was devastating. We need him for the rotation to be elite. We need him in that rotation badly. And I agree. You want, arguably, Carrasco is the second best starter. I mean, could you say that? Like, I'm not familiar enough with his work in the past, but he's very, very highly spoken of. And whenever I've seen him, it's been more or less lights out. I don't know if he's been consistently like that. And obviously he's had all sorts of things that have kept him off the field. But, right. We might have lost what could have been our number 2 starter in that situation. And, Stroman was like, it's devastating.
Well,
Stroman is a dramatic. I love Stroman. I love the way he talks. I love his confidence. I love his swagger. But he is he is hot and cold. There is no middle with him.
I think this yet again, and the whole topic of what we're discussing, I think this is another example of the importance of that 40-man roster and making it strong, because As sure as the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow, injuries are going to happen. Players are not going to be available and ready to play 162 games, every single one of them. They're going to have, little things here and there. They're going to have a little thing with their finger. They're going to have a little elbow issue. And, throughout the entire season, even a DeGrom, could get a little blister on his finger and be like, listen, we're not putting him on what used to be called a 10-day, which I was particularly a fan of. I think they're going back to a 14-day injured list in terms of a pitcher, etc., if they get injured. But I think this is an example of the 40-man roster and us now being prepared for the inevitable injuries, for the inevitable giving somebody rest, which I think is just as important as anything else. And I want everybody performing or reaching September, late September, early October, ready for the playoffs. So that's where the 40-man roster really, really comes into focus and play for me. So, yes, Carrasco has gone through his certain things and he's suffered from things. He actually I read something today where he literally said this is nothing compared to the cancer treatments that he had to go through, and he came back from that, and he's come back from other things. I consider this a relatively small bump in the road. That there will be other bumps in the road. We need to be prepared for them. We need to be prepared with Uncle Stevie. And the flexibility of his bank bank account to say, you know what? Say DeGrom went down. I would really rather we didn't, but okay. I know. But if DeGrom went down for any discernible amount of time, I feel confident that this owner and this front office will go out and go get a piece that they need via trade, etc., and say, you know what? That we've been thrown a curveball. Let's now we're gonna have to do something else. The former owners and the team for the last bunch of years has never been really prepared for these things happening and saying what do we got to do to continue? What do we got to do to pick up where that person left off? The flexibility.
Obviously, it's a negative situation to have a guy who's your potential number 2 starter in the rotation be out, but it's actually kind of sort of happy isn't the right word, but when I look back on us trying to MacGyver something together out of spare parts, I feel like we're in a much stronger position. There's 2 things. Obviously, Taijuan Walker, Stroman, David Peterson are going to move up in the rotation, I would imagine. You've got Joey Lucchesi, you've got Jordan Yamamoto, maybe Corey Oswalt. And I think that as you look at what's going on with the roster, no, we don't have the depth of someone like the Dodgers in our pitching rotation. We just don't have it. However, if there was an opportune time to sort of test the depth that we do have at the beginning of the season, look, being out for 60 days is obviously not awesome. But at the beginning of the season, where you have people that showed real promise, I thought like Jordan Yamamoto, he had last time I checked, and it's been a kind of a bummer because spring training games haven't been televised the way we all want them to be televised. But last time I checked, Jordan Yamamoto had a pretty impressive ERA. Joey Lucchesi was doing pretty well. You had sort of people that you would like to see, you'd like to see them pitch more to see what they've got. Is it a fluke? Is it like we haven't had that big of a sample size with some of these people that show real promise? And what better time to get that in than at the beginning when the stakes are lower, when you don't know where you are in terms of being in the hunt for a division or for more. So I feel like it's never good, but if there was a time for it to happen, it's kind of an opportune moment to check out some people that are showing promise.
I completely agree with you. And the one of the guys that you and I particularly are a huge fan of and are really rooting for is like a Jeremy Blevins. I want to see Jerry Blevins. I want to see Blevins make this team. I'd love to see that. And if it's at the cost of, say, these are all parts, right? There's 40 seats and the music's playing, and when the music stops, there's more than 40 people, but there's only 40 seats. The music's going to stop, and somebody's not going to be in a seat. There's players like Robert Gazelman, who's been around for a while and has had hit and miss kind of success. There's Yenzi Diaz that they've thrown. The games that they have broadcast, I've watched him, and he hasn't had a sparkling spring, which means he hasn't impressed. But there are players like Miguel Castro who's really he's really impressed in the chances that he's gotten. There's Sam McWilliams. Is just, they signed him for a lot of money, sight unseen almost, and does not have major league experience. But the guy throws gas, and he's going to start in the minors, and somebody down there is going to teach him how to be a major league pitcher. And so, there's opportunities abound for a bunch of the players that we have in the minors and the majors, that in that 40-man spots that we have that. I think we have the tools to be able to gotta move them around, and if somebody goes down, hey kid, let's show what you got. Blevins is a great example.
No, totally, absolutely. And when you're talking about oh man, one of the key guys in our bullpen is no longer around. Fortunately, Edwin Diaz has looked like the Edwin Diaz we paid for back in the day, and he's super confident. He's feeling really good, almost to the point where I'm like, don't jinx it, ixnay on the saying you're so good say. But he's he's looking really good. So when you talk about sort of like having a Familia or a Betances, when I've seen it, Jerry Blevins has been doing Jerry Blevins things. And also when you have somebody like it, I think that's part of the reason why it becomes so valuable to get someone like Jordan Yamamoto some starts, because you see what they've got. And someone like Jordan Yamamoto is going to be, I don't think he's going to be precious about where they decide to play him. If they decide to use him for long relief, I think he'll be happy to get the major league playing time. So, I feel like it's an opportune moment to check out some of these folks. Taijuan Walker, kind of a rough start in spring training, but he's looking really, really good now. And I think you, me, every last one of us, I think we're all excited to see what David Peterson does. He had quite the season in 2020, which was his first time above AA, I think. And with Carrasco out for however long it is, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever the case may be, this could be revealing stuff for a lot of people that are still, after showing some promise in spring training, are still kind of question marks. So you never like to see someone go down. But I actually went, when I saw Carrasco was out for 6 to 8 weeks, I was like, what happened to his elbow? Quick to the internet. I was like, oh, it wasn't his elbow. Why was he running sprints? He doesn't need to be running sprints. Who told him to run sprints? No sprints. No. However, the guy is, what the guy's been through is absolutely insane. And his mental toughness is unfreaking believable. So, provided he can rehab the leg the way he is supposed to rehab it, I think he's going to come back. I think he's going to be strong. And this gives us a great shot to see where we're at with some of these pieces that, we actually have, where we actually have depth as opposed to a whole lot of what, who, and oh no, which we've had from the last couple of years, especially when it comes to the rotation and the bullpen. And I love Familia. I would love to see Familia do well. I'd love to see anybody in a Mets uniform do well. But, the idea that we're messing around with some starting pitching and we might be able to feasibly use them in the pen a little later on, I think that's good stuff. Also, everybody's been talking about this, and I don't know if anyone's actually pulled the trigger on it, but people have been batting around the idea of doing away with the tradition. It used to be some people pitched entire games. There was that one DeGrom complete game a couple of years ago, but there was a complete game, and that was not necessarily the norm. But you had an opener and a closer, then you had long relief, then you had you're burning 7-8 pitchers in one game, and now, for the last couple of years, the thing that they've gotten into is this talk of having a starter as opposed to a starting pitcher, a starter, a closer, a middle pitcher. And part of me feels like that's sort of a bit of an effort to gaslight starting pitching and be like, you're not special. You're not worth that much. We're going to, someone's going to come out and do 3 innings. Big whoop. You can go 7. Great. Good for you. But when you have the kind of pitching depth that the Mets managed to snag in the offseason, where you have a lot of pieces and you want to try them all out and you want to see what they're good for, this might be the opportune time to go with an opener as opposed to the traditional starting pitcher, relief pitcher, closer situation.
Well, pitchers, all baseball players, but pitchers in particular are creatures of habit. And one thing that a lot of them have always said for a long period, for years, has been that they like when their roles are defined. A pitcher, pitchers that are tend to be middle relievers, like to know that they're coming in like that middle relief section, or an eighth inning man, a setup man for the closer. Defined roles seems to work very well with a lot of pitchers because it works with their workout, it works with their preparation. But in the modern game, modern meaning the last few years, if a guy's throwing, he's got to throw on his off days. He's, throwing sessions. He's doing his just kind of pickup work to kind of keep himself loose. I'm not the biggest critic of getting guys in and keeping them fresh and keeping them going, because say the team's doing fantastic and every starter is doing what you'd expect them to do, and they're going, let's call it 6 innings or so. And then the 7, 8, 9 are kind of, knowing that they're going to be coming in. That isn't necessarily getting enough work for some of the other guys that are in the bullpen, and you want them to have that in-game experience as we're going along. So in my mind, starting the season, I've never been against starting a season as, say, like a 6-man rotation, in consideration that you haven't stretched out all of your pitchers, all your starters really that well during spring training. I believe DeGrom pitched 4 innings today. The last couple of days, Stroman in his 3rd or 4th start now has, I think, stretched it out to about 3 innings. So, if we're starting the season, it's April, we're kind of building things up. They're dealing so much more with pitch counts as being the determining factor of how long a pitcher's staying in, not even whether he's got a lead, whether he's pitching well. There's the consideration now with a lot of pitchers that they don't want them to go more than 3 circulations through the lineup of the other team. Now the other teams, they got your number once they get to the 3rd time through the lineup. Exactly. If you notice, it was great today. This is how much of a pro DeGrom is. DeGrom did not throw a single curveball in the first inning of the game today. So him going through the lineup, through the other team's lineup, he relied more upon his fastball and his slider. And as he went through the next inning and went through these other pitchers, to these other players, he started to incorporate his curveball a little bit more, because he's not showing them all the bullets in his gun. He's kind of saving some things. That's very, very professional way of looking at it. So in the grand scheme of things, I personally am not opposed to considering it a 6-man rotation at the beginning of the season and making sure everyone's getting their work in, keeping it going. The middle rotation guys are coming in on a clean slate, not just coming in innings where there's a runner already in scoring position and they're in a tense situation already. And I like that. I like it's like an engine, and you're revving it every once in a while. You're going through the gears. It keeps the fluids going in a way, to me.
Well, there's certainly room to experiment. Like when you talk about having sort of like a 6-man rotation, obviously I think everyone would defer to DeGrom saying, what would you like to do? But the bottom line is we have we do have depth. We have depth that we never had before, but we have it at the back of the rotation as opposed to the front of the rotation. Like, you got to be the Dodgers to have, like depth at the front of your rotation. But we have like a whole bunch of that stuff at the back end of it where you're right. Like if there was going to be a time where people got experimental, if there was going to be a time where people, did this sort of stuff. Well, actually, that's what spring training is for. But at the beginning of the season, it could be a lot worse. Yeah, we obviously hope that Carrasco the whole thing that freaked me out about his leg was, well, that went out. What exactly is the deal with his elbow? Like, why does he have elbow soreness? Is this elbow soreness that's going to go away with some ice and ibuprofen, or is this elbow soreness that turns into you got to get surgery? So, like, on the one hand, people are like, he'll be back in 6 to 8 weeks when his leg's better. I was like, did we ever find out what was wrong with that elbow of his? Did anyone? Okay.
It was a soreness that he's had before that I bet a bunch of other pitchers have the same things, and they either throw through it or it does not seem to me to be an uncommon thing. I think they all go through it. And here's the remarkable thing as well. We have been considering and thinking about our depth in the 40-man roster now, and we have not even spoken one word about a single position player. We've been discussing it literally in terms of the pitching staff, both starters and relievers. So, that's how important pitching is to the game now. That's how important the entire pitching staff is to the entire 40-man. And if you look at our position players and some of them that are still kind of on the cusp, on the bubble, Albert Amora has had a great offseason. I mean, a great spring training. He's certainly looking like he could maybe place himself in our outfield as say like a fourth outfielder. And there's the depth that we haven't had for a long time in our outfield. We've had a couple of guys who have, I think, shown themselves pretty well. Khalil Lee, I personally, I know he's going down, but I think he's shown as himself as somebody good that we can call up there. Pilar, I think has looked very good in center field as a defensive player as well. So, the depth that we're referring to. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with the pitching staff, but the depth that I believe that we have in our infielders and our outfielders and our catching core, I'm very, very encouraged by that. One thing that you and I discussed literally 2 weeks ago on our first podcast, I wanted to bring up as well because it actually has now kind of come up. Cespedes still has not been signed by any team.
Yeah. You sent me that article when they said some article that you sent me said that scouts were there mostly out of morbid curiosity. I was like, oh, that's brutal. Ouch.
It's brutal. It's brutal in determining the fact that he can still swing a bat at 36 years old and probably do something, but there's not a lot of faith in him to put him on a 40-man roster on a team and have him eat up a spot on the 40-man roster when I don't feel confident of putting him in the outfield. And without the DH without the universal DH, that, as we said earlier, it eliminated half the opportunities and half the teams that could have possibly, picked him up and used him as a DH. A guy that can still swing a bat.
I think, and it segs into a very interesting thing that's been on my mind a lot recently. I'm amazed that more people aren't angry with Major League Baseball for dragging their feet when it comes to figuring out what's going on with the universal DH. Everyone in the National League was violently opposed to it because there's nothing better than when Thor hits a home run or when nothing better than when Thor hits a home run or when DeGrom gets on base. When you see one of your favorite pitchers rake, that's great stuff. And then all of a sudden, when we realize what the DH could do for us after seeing it last year and seeing, a situation like we've got with Pete Alonso and Dom, where we're going, boy, it would be great to find a way to have both of their bats in the lineup. It's amazing to me that Major League Baseball dragged their feet when it came to doing this stuff and figuring out whether or not there's going to be the universal DH, because big life decisions involving large amounts of money and people going places to do stuff were being made. And not knowing that it really was a raw deal for the National League as a whole. And, I look, and if there was a DH in the National League, Cespedes might have a job right now.
Yeah, it's not the first time that Major League Baseball shot itself in the foot or been its own worst enemy in terms of things. And I mean, it goes for the Players Association combined with MLB, who literally they can't get themselves on the same page of being the stewards of the game and looking at how their decisions take the business end of this into play. From the owners, from the commissioner to the Players Association, which gives me goosebumps or gives me scared bumps about what the collective bargaining agreement negotiations are going to be like next year in 2022.
We are gearing up for something ugly between players and Major League Baseball. I think there's going to be so much bad will. There's going to be so much bad will about this. There's going to be so much so much ugliness regarding team control, and justifiably so. I mean, when you have the situation of pitchers burning their arms out while they're still making league minimum, and then sort of being on the back end of their career by the time they hit free agency, that gets really ugly. And then when you have a situation like happened with Kalenic, where it was very open and very brazen, we're doing this stuff to control these people, and it's just like you wind up in situations where you're like, hey, this would be better for baseball. This would be better for the team, players, the fans. But it really just comes down to some, kind of ugly stuff. And so that, coupled with the fact that they dragged their feet on the universal DH, which affected everyone, more so the National League, but, everyone really, I have a feeling that it's going to get ugly up in here.
I think it's going to get ugly, and I think it's maybe more of an impetus for, say, the negotiations that are going on right now with Lindor. If I was him, if I was Frankie Lindor's agent right now, I would probably be saying, you know what, Frankie, they're dangling $300 million in your face. I would say let's take that because of the uncertainty, exactly as you're saying, the uncertainty of what's coming up. I think across the board, locking a couple of these things in, such as Lindor or such as Conforto, is probably a really, really good idea to do right now, with the uncertainty of the CBA coming up and what could happen if there's even a shutdown. Mm-hmm. And the reality, there's two realities. I've heard so much mention about, it's such an amazing class of free agents, shortstops that are coming up in 2022. So if the Mets don't sign Lindor, there's a whole bouquet to be able to choose from. The players that are coming up in free agency for just the shortstop position next year, there's no lock that any of them necessarily would come to the Mets. This offseason was I think totally prove the fact that you're not going to get every player that you might express interest in. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we got Lindor, and that was awesome. We had the best offseason we've ever had in my memory. But at the same time, we did not get the big three. So you're totally right, being like, oh man, we're going to have our pick of the litter. No. History has proven no.
Right, and those other fantastic shortstops like Trevor Story or Corey Seager or anything like that, they're going to cost $300 million. What are you're going to get away with not paying somebody, like on an extensive long or a high AAV contract? So the juggling, the financial juggling that they're referring to, I totally disagree with how it's looked at or how it's criticized. I personally think if you know what a player gives you, if you know what a player is going to deliver for you, in the town, especially in a town like New York, a player like, say, Conforto, who. He's a Met. He came up in our system. He wants to stay a Met. Mm-hmm. Then lock that man down. And if you look forward past 2022 and you look at what the free agent markets are going to look like in 2022, 23, 24, and 25, they're not that crazily impressive of classes of who becomes available, so that if you look at your team and you look at guys that are in their mid-20s or so, fast forward a couple of years and say, wow, you know what? It would not be the worst idea to have this guy, and be ready for the young kids that we have drafted in and now coming up, and that we're really hoping can make a good contribution. So I've been following along with the negotiations, or at least the rumored negotiations, because I never feel that we're really that privy to what's actually
and nor
going
should
on.
we be. I mean, it makes it that much more juicy and interesting for you, for me, for all of us, that we know what players are getting played, but we know what players are getting paid. But I don't feel like that's anyone's business other than the player and the team, and I like it. I'm in radio. We have ugly contract negotiations every 2 to 3 years. And, it is a giant faux pas for somebody to tell you what they're getting paid. The company doesn't like it. Other employees don't like it. It's just not a good move. It's not a good look. And I kind of don't understand why. I do not understand why everything is so open. Like Francisco Lindor has seen that, in the very recent history, seen that shortstops can get an awful lot of money if you play for teams like San Diego, and then he winds up in a new situation. That doesn't help anyone. Everyone was like, "Oh wow!" When that deal happened in San Diego, everyone was like, "Lindor just got really pricey." And do you know what's amazing? All right, I don't know if Lindor is this good. Obviously, he's great. But he was in an 0-for-7 skid when spring training starts. He wasn't bothered by it. No one was really bothered by it. Obviously you get a new guy that's an all-star of a player, just, like a potential Hall of Famer, and you want to see some fireworks right off the bat, but no one was really stressing about it. And at the same time, people were talking about an extension. And he was like, whatever. I got to get to know these people. They got to get to know me. And I feel like almost the moment the extension negotiations started, he's hitting grand slams. He's I almost feel like he intentionally was taking it easy to begin with, going, maybe it's better to be a free agent. And then when the negotiations started, he's like, crap, I got to start knocking a few out of these out of the park. There are millions of dollars at stake with every at bat. And I almost feel like he turned it on for the negotiations and has been murdering the baseball ever since. And that could come down to one of two things. Thing number one, he rises to the occasion and performs well under pressure. I'm totally cool with that. Thing number two, he is so freaking good, he decides when he's got a rake. And either way, I'm okay with that.
Well, my fascination has always been with the term, next year the Dodgers have this much money coming off when this player becomes a free agent, etc. like that. No, that money doesn't come off. Doesn't come off. You got to replace that player with a viable option. Yeah. And unless you're in a completely rebuild where now you're going to rely upon kids that you can get away with not paying for the next couple of years, as a bunch of teams get away with doing. But if a team like the Dodgers are a great example, the Yankees are a great example, the Mets, the Red Sox, the Cubs should be a good example. Those costs don't come off. You're just replacing it with another expensive cost that the Mets payroll to me is never going to be below. Right now, let's call it $200 million. As the thresholds keep rising and whatever CBA is renegotiated, et cetera, like that, I expect the Mets have to be in the top 4 or 5 payrolls every year, regardless of whether this contract's coming off for that person or, we have to extend this person. Yes, it's an expensive, it's an expense that you have to go through. That's called business.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, no, it's like, it was nice being the plucky underdogs that did well after they MacGyvered wins together out of spare parts. That was fun in 2015. That time is over now. Let's move on with it. Yeah. But I mean, it's an insane thing. And you're totally right. Unless you have a rock star in the farm system that you just know is going to be filling that position that then you're right. You can't say it's coming off the books. Like, unless the owner. Go on.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I interrupted you. The owner of the Cleveland Indians, there was a story about him just came out yesterday, him talking about Lindor. And he was asked, he sees what's going to happen to Lindor. The Cleveland Indians offered him $200 million just literally a year or two ago. And he didn't accept it. The owner came out in a story today and said, he's going to get, $300 million or so. We can't afford that and put a team around him. So this is the finances or, the economics of baseball in raw form, showing the disparity between, the teams, the different levels. And that if there is going to be something that gets discussed in the CBA coming up next year, and something that has to be fixed in this game, I personally think it's more that than necessarily dealing with a salary cap, etc. It's the fact that there's a bunch of teams that they will not be able to afford a player like that. And if they develop a player like that, it's a finite amount of time that they can keep him. And that's not fair. To me, that's not fair. If Lindor wanted to stay in Cleveland the whole rest of his career because he loved it and wanted to give them the opportunity, to win and do it for a long period of time, he would have been alone. Like that's horrible. So the Mets right now, in the circumstance that we're in right now, it's going to cost you for Lindor. It's going to cost you for Conforto. And there's other players that are going to be coming up. You're going to have a high payroll.
I think, look, Steve Cohen didn't get to, Uncle Stevie didn't get to where he's at by not being slightly canny in the business world. And I have to imagine that there was a push after COVID, COVID was financially ruinous for pretty much every industry on the face of the planet, with the exception of people that deliver stuff. Like, it was a bad time financially for the entire world. And I have to imagine that Uncle Stevie, having a habit of buying low and selling high, looked at the situation and went, if we're going to pull the trigger on this, it better be now, because I know I'm going to be able to swoop in with a fresh injection of cash and do things with this team that the rest of the league and the rest of the league and the rest of Major League Baseball won't be able to do. This is an opportune time for me to come in and go, hey, would you like to ease your financial burden? Let me take some of that on. I'm looking at you, Indians and Francisco Lindor. Like, you just know that had to be part of his thinking. Obviously he's more than savvy as a businessman, but he's a savvy enough baseball man to know that there was opportunity in the fiscal downside that COVID caused in Major League Baseball. And I think that was a big part of the reason why there was a push to get it done now. I would imagine that he probably told the Wilpons, look, we've been doing this dance for a little bit now, but let's pull the trigger, shall we? Like, I have to imagine there was a deal of hardball being played, because it's just such an incredible time to have an opportunity. And it's funny, I've got one of my many bosses is a massive Indians fan, and he was like, because I kind of like you, I kind of would root for the Mets, a little bit, because I like to see you happy around the office. Not anymore. Like, the Mets can suck it. Like, I was like, I understand exactly how you feel. I've been a New York Mets fan my entire life. Believe me, I am acquainted with the emotions that you are experiencing right now. But you know what? If there's anything that being a Mets fan has taught me my entire life, is that the world is an unfair place. Occasionally, it's going to be unfair in your favor, and when it is, you take it. So sorry, dude, suck it. We got Lindor, and we're going to keep Lindor.
Except for the fact that a team cannot play against just anybody. It's not the Harlem Globetrotters against the Generals. It's a league that you want it to be competitive. And Uncle Stevie, as much as I know that he's a great businessman and has done that, he's also the extravagant kind of man who spent $150 million on a painting. And whether it's because the painting spoke to him so much, or he looked at it as an actual investment of, I'm going to buy a $150 million painting because in a couple of years that thing's going to be worth $160 million.
Yeah, I'm going to look at
around.
Yeah, I'm going to look at it while I cook in the kitchen.
Right, exactly.
Every day that $150 million painting is going to look at me while I'm fixing spaghetti and meatballs for my kids. And then 5 years from now, I'm going to have $25 million extra dollars that I didn't have. Plus, I will have gotten to look at the painting for a few years.
So there's extravagance in certain things, and there are certain teams that are looking that want to do that extravagant, or there's a competitive balance that you're trying to maintain, because you have to play against somebody else. And I hate to sound so socialistic or communist about it, but yes, there's an upper echelon of teams. There's teams like the Yankees, et cetera, who can dictate things and have their own networks that are worth so much more. So there's streams of revenue, et cetera. They make so much more off of merchandising, et cetera, than say any other teams or like that. And the Yankees have been crying money issues now for a little while as well. So it's all relative. In my family, everything's relative.
Do you? Do you think that players, like, say we extend Francisco Lindor, we give him $300 million. Do you think a player like Francisco Lindor, who obviously isn't short of a few bucks at this stage in his career, but do you think someone like Francisco Lindor says, hey, Steve, you just gave me $300 million. What would you do with, say, 100 million of that? Like, do you think that they're asking him for stock tips and investing advice? Like, I wonder if that could figure into negotiations. Like, okay, we'll pay you 250 million, or 300 million if you agree to have 50 million of that managed by Uncle Steve. Like,
there are all different kinds of values placed on things. There are, I forget which pitcher it was. This was just a couple of years back. And I remember the particulars of what he was signed for, and of his contract, there was certain amount of free rides on the owner's private plane back and forth to his home, which I believe was in Florida, and I forget where he was playing. It might have been New York, it might have been for the Yankees or so. But so the crux of his contract had perks and had these other things that were able to be worked in as value. There's values. If you play in New York or say California, you pay higher taxes than a player who's playing somewhere else. A player that goes to Canada, and Springer is a very good example of this. You're paid in Canadian dollars, and right now the Canadian dollar is fairly equal to the U.S. dollar. But there have been times when the exchange rate has not been fantastic, and so are they accommodating that in the deal? Is there some kind of extra consideration in the fact that there's a differential between those things? So you're right in terms of the fact that there might be other perks, there might be other things that are negotiated into the contract in consideration. The Dodgers are a great example of a team that looked at not only where it is, what it wanted to accomplish, how much needed to be invested in that, and it reaped them not only several years now of being at the top of their division and being in the playoffs every year, and they started to get actually a little bit desperate in the fact that they hadn't won a World Series yet, and they said we're not holding back. We're going for it. We're going to get Mookie Betts, and we're gonna push him. And now that they've won it, they went even further and said we're gonna pick up pitchers. We're going to pick up anybody who needs to get it done. And, so the Dodgers are a great example of a team that's not going to hold back. That's going to put it back.
The Dodgers for a long time, I think, have had the highest payroll in baseball, right? Like even more so than the Yankees, or am I making that up? Yeah.
No,
so like,
totally fair.
I mean, like the Dodgers were willing to carry the highest payroll in baseball and not win a World Series for a really, really long time. And then they won a World Series, albeit in the shortened season, but they won a World Series. So, like, if the purse strings were loose before, despite the fact that they tended to crumble in the postseason, somebody's making it rain in the Dodgers organization, because they actually have a world championship now. And, now the purse strings are even looser, and now they're going to spend even more. Now they're going to go get a starting rotation that makes everybody else, you have amazing pitchers within the Dodgers organizations that have become afterthoughts. It's insane. It really is an embarrassment of riches for the Dodgers. And it should be embarrassing, because at least when the Yankees went out and bought championships, they managed to close the deal.
Which is the embarrassing situation going on in Chicago, who have finally, after 103 years, broke their myth, and they finally won a World Series. And everyone said, you know what, the Chicago Cubs, they now won. They're now going to have that consistency for a couple of years, where they're there. And this is only a couple of years removed from that. And they're trading from desperation. They traded Darvish to the Padres for a couple of picks, and they're not investing their team. They're talking about trading off Chris Bryant, etc. And they're giving up in the second largest market. No, I'm sorry, the third largest market.
It's market 3. Yeah.
Yeah, market number 3 in the country. That should be like a shot off the bow of for baseball as well, coming up in this CBA. So to come full circle in the discussion that we started with and came all the way through, depth is a seriously important thing to a successful team going. The investment in that depth is something that the New York Mets didn't do for the longest time, and one of the proudest things that I am of what they're doing right now, it would seem, is that the depth has become a super important thing that's going to give them the flexibility going through the season, knowing there's going to be injuries, knowing they're going to need pieces and parts, and it takes a full team, it takes a whole team to make the dream. So I'm proud and happy that's what's been going on, and that depth now in what is it, roughly 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks now to the start of the season. That depth is what's is going to be put to the test now.
Yeah, it was an interesting set of emotions that I ran through when I found out what had happened to Cookie, because I was just like, oh no, and then I was like, actually, this might not be so bad, and then I was like, hey, we're actually in a position where this might not be so bad, and it's one step closer to the expression "that's so Mets" being a good thing.
Exactly.
What you cooking this weekend?
You know what? My wife and I, one of my wife's favorite things in the world is pot roast.
Ooh.
And I particularly never been that huge of a pot roast fan, but my wife, she'll whip it up sometimes, and she nails it, and it really gets me going. So there was a couple of considerations of things to make, but we went straightforward pot roast in the Dutch oven, and is fantastic.
What when you get a pot roast, obviously that could be a couple different things. What cut of meat did you purchase?
I purchased went straight chuck, a full roast of a cut, which is a fatty piece. You got to do you want to do a little bit of cutting. You're not going to leave all that fat in there, but you are going to leave some of it in, so that it's, the slow cooking process is going to melt some of that down, and it's only adding to your flavor, etc. So you're totally right. You can use several different cuts, but the one great benefit of say using a chuck, a usual cut, is that the slow cooking process in all those spices, in those liquids, is going to make even that cut of meat taste really, really good.
To me, of all the roasts, I think, chuck, because it's, I don't know if it's the fattiest, but it's fatty, and I like a chuck, I think, is probably the closest you're going to get to a steak if you're doing something with one of the cheaper pieces of meat, if you sort of treat it the right way. And this segs into an interesting conversation about barbecue, because when COVID kicked in, I started to cook. I never really cooked before. My cooking failures are a well-documented thing and a laughing point for a good many of my friends. And I grilled a little bit, but it was kind of a hit or miss thing where I'd be like, I've seen some people put this in a bag of salad dressing before cooking it. Then what? And like, I didn't know what temperature I was cooking to. I didn't know what I was doing. So occasionally it would come out good. Usually it came out okay. Sometimes it would come out bad when I grilled things. And when COVID kicked in, I decided, all right, I'm actually going to read some instructions and see what's up here. And barbecue, look, obviously barbecue is a complicated thing. There is an art to it. I'm not dismissing that. But if you think you suck at cooking, yet you want to make something delicious, I think it's a great gateway drug into cooking in general, because you can take something like a chuck roast and essentially what you're doing when you're barbecuing is you're slow cooking it. And the stakes are significantly lower, so to speak. You have a cheaper cut of meat, and also, you're not doing it over a higher heat. So you don't run the risk of ruining it by leaving it on for, like a minute in one direction and winding up with something tough and burnt. Like when you start smoking things, when you start slow cooking things, I think it's an amazing forgiving way to teach yourself how to cook. And I think I say that because I went from not being able to cook even a little bit at the beginning of this year to now being able to be pretty confident in some stuff. And it's all because of cooking things slowly, whether that's in a slow cooker or whether that's on my grill when I'm smoking something barbecue style. So when you did the chuck roast, like, was it you or your wife doing the cooking? How did you season it?
Both. Basically, both she and I are really, really big fans of adding gravies to whatever meat you're cooking. Only because of, yes, there's the inherent moistures inside and everything, but a gravy really kicks that off. It adds to that. So you're combining say even just a store bought or even a powdered gravy and mixing it up or making a roux even out of it. You can really add a lot of flavor to that. I'm a huge advocate of adding a lot of herbs and spices. We in our yard have planted a limited amount of things because we live in a very temperate. You and I both live in a very, very temperate area. So there's certain things. So rosemary,
115 is murder on basil.
Yeah, no, my basil loves it for some reason. It's done really, really well the last couple of years. It's the types of tomatoes that I particularly would love to grow myself that just they can't do it. It's too brutal, and a shortened season because of that brutal 120s or so. So rosemary in particular, really, really hearty and adds a fantastic fresh flavor to anything. Gravies are awesome whenever you're cooking, especially slow cooking. And then in particular vegetables, all of the normal stocks. So celeries, carrots, mushrooms, potatoes. They're all complementary and they cook together really, really well.
So like walk me through it. You bought the chuck roast and you trim some of the fat off of it. Mm-hmm. And then did you do a dry rub? Did you season it before putting it in the Dutch oven?
Yes, and also seared it a little bit before adding anything else. So for particularly olive oil, getting a little bit of a sear on it at the top of it, but just before adding anything to it. And then the benefits of a Dutch oven, the beauty of it is the combination of everything after that sear, and now all of those flavors over the time going. So
why don't you explain to people what a Dutch oven is? Because up until about a year ago, I thought that was when you farted and pulled the covers over your partner's head.
It is the same. That's another kind of Dutch oven, which is fantastic. But just it's a traditional type of cooking implement that. Especially in your stocks and stews and the long-term cooking things, it keeps the temperature in. It spreads the temperature out very, very well. It's a very good process of cooking anything.
It's basically like an enamel pot that does a really great job of cooking things evenly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you sear it with a little olive oil. You put it in the Dutch oven, like vegetables in with it.
After searing it. So after you've seared it, you've brought it up to temperature, adding in your vegetables and moisture, because, as I said, the slow cooking temperature, the long-term temperature it breaks everything down. They conglomerate, meaning they add to each other. Just the same way as making a rub, and you're making a rub of all these multiple different dry elements that are combining to make something that, as the heat now comes onto it, they're going to break down, they're going to crystallize, etc. In a Dutch oven or in a slow cook process. It's basically the breaking down of all of those elements, the moistures that are in all of them, because obviously vegetables like celery, etc., carrots, they've got moisture in them, so they're cooking from the inside. They're melting into the fats of the meat. Potatoes are also something with a high moisture content. So and they cook very well, and they add to it. You're basically wanting to keep adding and adding things that are cooking together harmoniously and adding to fantastic flavors.
That does sound good. Ray is, as you have probably been able to tell from some of these conversations we've had about cooking, he knows what the hell he's doing. I do not. Here's the thing. If you are like me, if you suck at cooking, if you don't know what it is you're doing, if you've got absolutely no notion of what's going on in the kitchen or on the grill, this is a great way to start. You get a chuck roast. You get any kind of roast. I find that chuck roast, whether it be, or I find that a beef roast, whether it be sort of like a top round or a chuck roast, works well for this. And they're lower stakes, literally. They're lower stakes. They're less pricey. But what I do, equal parts salt, pepper, garlic. You coat it liberally. You put it on. You have a cold side of your grill and a hot side of your grill. You get it up to a whopping 250 degrees. This is not hot. And you put it on the cold side of the grill and go away for several hours until it hits about, whatever it is you want. You use a meat thermometer. You get it to about, I like it around 135 for a good medium rare, and you're good to go. You thought you couldn't cook? Booyakasha, you can cook. It's good stuff.
Yeah. And that's all literally technique, and the ability to do that in, say, your standard Weber 22-inch barbecue, and breaking that up into hot zones and cold zones. There's this simple art of making hot dogs, burgers and hot dogs on a grill. There's the added benefits of starting to use each side of that grill, the hot side for searing, the cold side for letting smoke interact with everything and working it through the air ducts at the bottom and the top of your barbecue. So you're determining how much air is coming into it, which determines your temperature as well as the flow of any smoke that you're adding to it. So if you're adding any wood chips that you're adding, say, to the hot side and creating a smoke that's now engulfing and incorporating into your cook, these are all techniques that from the simplest part to the highest mastery of barbecue cooking, you can develop these skills through that. And I totally encourage anybody that's interested in any kind of barbecue cooking, get yourself a Weber 22-inch like standard barbecue grill, and just from there, there's so many ways to play that fiddle. It's a great tool, and there's a varied way of using it. It's fantastic.
I did it's funny because what opened my eyes to how cooking, and in particular slow cooking, works was starting to barbecue stuff. And over the weekend, I was like, it's kind of windy where I am. That kind of messes with the grill, makes it difficult to keep the temperature consistent. I was like, I've never done this before, and I don't especially like pot roast, but I took that chuck roast in the same way that I usually prepare it for the grill, salt, pepper, garlic. I did it, and I put it in the oven, which is the idea of oven baking a steak always seemed wrong to me. And I don't know why, but I just like the idea that you could cook a steak in the oven. No, it wasn't for me until this weekend. And it was freaking great. It's even easier than doing it on the grill. I set it to 225, went away for about 3 hours, came back, and then I really cheated because I didn't have a roasting pan. So what I did was, in the same pot that I was cooking this chuck roast in, I took it, I put it on the stove, I heated it up super hot with a little bit of vegetable oil, because like I think vegetable gets a little bit hotter before it starts smoking. So I went vegetable oil instead of olive oil. And I got it as hot as humanly possible, and I seared the outside. By the way, big fan of the reverse sear. I like, a lot of people say they're scared of it, and I don't understand why. To me, it allows you to control the process that much more, because I could sit there reverse searing this chuck roast with the meat thermometer in it, so I could see exactly when it hit a perfect medium rare 135. So I guess what we're saying is, if you can't cook, start slow, literally slow cook. It makes everything so very much easier.
You're totally right.